We really have today a fascinating event, of course, on a matter of global importance. And apart from the group that we have here, even if that group is small, of course, we also are online, and the issues are certainly large. I would like just briefly to introduce our distinguished speaker, Senator Mushahid Hussain Sayed, who is currently chairman of the Senate Defense Committee of Pakistan. But there's a great deal more that I can say. He's been a member of the Senate of Pakistan for nearly 25 years, and then has been also a longtime member of the Senate. He serves as chairman now of the Senate Defense Committee, and also, and this is an area that I think people will find of considerable interest, chair of the Parliamentary Committee on CPEC. He knows China extremely well. He went first to China as a teenager. Most recently, he was deeply involved in the celebration of Henry Kissinger's historic visit to Beijing on an event that was held on March 20th of this year, so only a few weeks ago. And as everyone knows, Kissinger and his delegation passed through Pakistan on their way to Beijing. There was a diplomatic illness that kept Kissinger out of sight, and then the rest is history. And Senator Mushahid was the Pakistani representative at that celebration, explaining some of the internal dynamics and the diplomacy that was involved in that historic visit. He's also served he has a very broad range of dimensions. Of course, many things in the diplomatic area, but he's also taught politics and international relations at the Punjab University in Lahore before leaving academics first for the media in 1979. And in the media, he was editor for several years of the Muslim, a major national English publication in Islamabad. He's written 3 books on Pakistan's foreign policy and domestic politics. But then as well, he served as leader of the Pakistani delegation to the UN Human Rights Commission in Geneva. So this is what we would say in the West, I guess, a Renaissance man, a person of many dimensions. And I think you'll find from the discussion lively and interesting. We have his interlocutor here, of course, Associate Professor of Practice Joshua White, whom many of you know. He teaches the Asian Security course and other courses related to South Asia at SAIS. He has also significant policy experience, having served on the National Security Council in the White House, dealing with South Asia. So I know that this is going to be a lively discussion. We're really privileged to have our speaker here today. I should also mention, privileged to have Pakistan's ambassador to the United States, Ambassador Khan, who is an East Asia specialist also. And so I know that this is going to be a wonderful event. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Welcome. Shirley.
Thank you so much. Are we great? It's delightful to be here today and to be able to have a conversation with the senator and Mr. Ambassador. It's very good to see you. Thank you for being here as well. Senator Mushahid Hussain looms large not only in Pakistani foreign policy, but more broadly in relations between South Asia and China, and has for many years. And so we're going to touch on that relationship. But I want to begin as we are here in Washington. I know you've made some of the rounds here in Washington. You have many old friends and new friends, with your views of the U.S.-Pakistan relationship. I think there was some expectation over the last couple of years that as the United States wound down its involvement in Afghanistan, its presence in Afghanistan, that Pakistan would become less interesting to Washington, less important. It doesn't seem to have played out that way, but there do seem to be different messages coming from the United States. You know, Deputy Secretary Wendy Sherman was in India a few weeks ago and said something to the effect of, you know, the United States doesn't see itself having a broad relationship with Pakistan. And so I wanted to know, first of all, you know, how does that strike you? Is this refreshing realism? Is this an affront? Is this unwise? How do you see how this relationship is progressing? And where do you think realistically it has the opportunity to go in the current environment?
Thank you very much. First, thank you so much, Dean Calder. It was a pleasure talking to you earlier, and thank you for your kind words. Good morning and assalamu alaikum, and ohayo gozaimasu to our Japanese friends, aning hashimika to our Korean friends, and ni hao to our Chinese friends. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, in the name of the Almighty, the Lord of all mankind. It's a pleasure to be here at Johns Hopkins. I'm an old Washingtonian. I used to be in the Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, and we used to come here for lectures, research, and right across we have this Brookings and Carnegie Endowment, and then there used to be a very interesting place called the National Security Archive, which I believe is now shifted to George Washington University. And I used to do a lot of research there. So it's good to be, it's like a homecoming of sorts. And talking about the homecoming, I think that there's always this feeling, how important is Pakistan? And I'm reminded of this famous interview of Richard Armitage in June 2001. He was visiting India, Richard Armitage, this Deputy Secretary of State, like Wendy Sherman. And he said he had an interview with my good friend, the editor of The Hindu, Malini Parthasarthi. She's still the editor. And her cousin N. Ram is also a good friend. I wrote for them also. And by you mentioned South Asia, I was the first to start the Pakistan-India Track 2 in 1984 when I was editor of The Muslim. The first time, Pakistan-India Track 2. So Richard Armitage was asked by Malini Parthasarthi in June 2001, 3 months before 9/11, what is your relationship with Pakistan going to be? He said, oh, Pakistan, was an artificial relationship. And it won't be like that ever. Because Pakistan, our focus is India. And we are talking of the National Missile Defense, NMD. That time it was a big thing. And that was June 2001. And come 9/11, the whole situation changed. So Wendy Sherman, when she makes that remark in India, a day before arriving, at a time when in November, I'm visiting from Pakistan. Of course, I was dropping by and we had some meetings. We have 5-6 major delegations going from Washington to Pakistan. So, and they're not going for sightseeing. I can assure you of that. They should do that in the summer. We'll invite them in the summer along with you and Dean Calder. So obviously, where Pakistan is located, where Pakistan's role is, that is the center of gravity in global politics today. Pakistan, Central Asia, China, Russia, India, Indian Ocean, Arabian Sea, Iran, Afghanistan. That's where the action is. That's a happening place. And Pakistan's role has been very positive and proactive. Dean Calder mentioned what we did 50 years ago. It was the biggest geopolitical coup, a bridge between Washington and Beijing. And of course, we are ready for that role whenever we get the call. But about this other thing, how important Pakistan is and what's the role. I remember on 17th of August, 2017, President Trump announced his South Asian strategy. with a lot of fanfare. And the focus was Afghanistan and India. And there were some notes of warning for Pakistan. I was asked, and there was a surge of American troops. And the surge in Afghanistan. This is August 17, 2017, President Trump. CNN asked me, what do you think of President Trump's South Asian strategy? I said, my views on that strategy are the same as that of Dr. Albert Einstein. He said, Einstein? What are you talking about, Senator? Einstein is dead and gone. He was a scientist. I said, Einstein said, trying to do the same thing over and over again is either a sign of stupidity or insanity. I said, this is a tried, tested, and failed formula. He said, what do you expect then? I said, I'm expecting that 6 months later, we'll get a call, and I want to give you our dialing code. 9251 is Islamabad. You'll call us to broker talks with the Afghan Taliban for the peace process. I was proven right. And the call came, and we helped it do that. And so I think that Pakistan's role has been to promote the peace process because we are the principal stakeholders apart from the people of Afghanistan. We have hosted the largest number of refugees for the longest duration in history. We are the only Muslim country which has won an inland war on terrorism after 9/11 on our own at the cost of 87,000 people, soldiers and civilians. So we know, and today also, we would like to have a very robust and a good relationship with the United States. And I feel that right now, I've been here, there's some anger here, there's some animus, there's some sulking here also, what happened. I think most of the anger is at the Biden administration, but still there's some crossfire we sometimes get caught because people look for favorite scapegoats and rather than going at what went wrong in the policy. But we expect a resumption of this relationship based on mutually compatible interests, focusing on stability in Afghanistan, which means ensuring that there is no new conflict, no influx of refugees, and no unraveling of the system there, and which means, in our view, engagement with the Afghan Taliban, whether you like it or not. Secondly, counterterrorism. That's a common concern. There are, according to the UN Security Council report of 26th of July, 2021, there are 5 major terror groups operating inside Afghanistan, 10,000 of them. The largest is TTP, which is anti-Pakistan. Then ISIS, about 3,000, 2,500, 3,000. Then Al-Qaeda, few hundreds. Then ETIM, which is anti-China. And IMU, in Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, which is anti-Uzbekistan. So I think on that minimum common denominator of countering terrorism, there can be cooperation. For starters, with the United States, and I think it's still a work in progress. There are discussions taking place. Because ultimately, US, we have learned from our mistakes and we're not repeating old mistakes. And I'm telling my American friends, please make new mistakes, don't repeat old ones. Don't abandon Afghanistan. Don't think that this has nothing to do with the US. The threat to the homeland came, and the threat is still rare with ISIS-K and other terror groups. So that's where we are. And I think that these discussions that will take place this month, and hopefully by the new year, things should be more on an even keel, and that sulking or anger will subside. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to follow up on what you said about Afghanistan. I think the Taliban's victory in Afghanistan certainly has been challenging for the Biden administration to navigate. In certain ways, it's also been challenging for Pakistan to navigate. And there are a lot of discussions here about how to provide humanitarian assistance in ways that do not flow through the new Taliban government, which is populated at the senior levels by many UN designated figures and other unsavory types. I wanted to get your perspective. What do you think is a reasonable threshold that Taliban government should have to cross for Pakistan to grant diplomatic recognition of the new government?
I was reading an article yesterday. It's an English language Japanese publication called Nikkei Asia. And this was written by an American journalist, Andrew North, yesterday. Today's the 4th, I think. And it was on 3rd of November. Andrew North. And he is in Kabul. In Nikkei Asia, he mentioned, out of 38 million Afghan people, 23 million are at the risk of food scarcity, shortages. 5 million children under the age of 5 are at risk of malnutrition and almost collapse. And then there is a whole lot of issues of humanitarian nature. So our first priority is it's not about the Taliban right now. It's about the people of Afghanistan. The onset of winter, we have to ensure and avert a humanitarian disaster. Food shortages, medicine shortages, children, other people who are suffering. So I think that is the core concern, and that's why we want to engage with the international community on that. Regarding the other issues, yes, we did not rush into recognition. We have been coordinating with our international allies and our regional allies, especially China, Russia, Iran, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, plus Turkey and Qatar. And also we are in consultation with Washington. Pakistan played a very key role in the evacuation. 27,000 Afghan nationals, US nationals, and nationals from total 39 countries exited Afghanistan through either Pakistani planes or the Pakistani borders. And we have been providing that kind of support. So I think it's extremely important. And at the same time, we're telling Taliban also, along with the regional friends, that this is not Afghanistan of the 1990s. This is a different Afghanistan. There's a dynamic civil society, there's a robust middle class, there's a free media, there are issues of women's education, women's empowerment, women's rights. And yes, in certain areas, there's rigidity. I mean, it's like asking the American religious right to accept same-sex marriages or asking the Vatican to accept abortions. It's not easy because a lot of these people are very strong and conservative with strong views. But we're trying to do that. And I think the Taliban also are more pragmatic and more chastened than before. They do not have an ideological worldview that they are going to talk of liberation of Kashmir or Palestine or Rohingya. Their focus is a more tribal Pashtun Islam confined to Afghanistan. And I think right now the issue is, the core issue is number one, humanitarian crisis, how to avert a collapse. And secondly, coordinate with the regional countries and international community. And third, have a doable counter-terror strategy along with the United States of America. So, and about the Taliban, I'd like to say one other thing, that in the last 20 years, there's been a process where a new factor has emerged. Taliban is not the Communist Party of China as a monolith centralized force. It's a very, it's like more like a movement. And a lot of the field commanders are those who have been battle hardened. They were autonomous commanders. They were involved in the insurgency. So they are also a factor. It's not just the Mullah brother and the leadership in Doha, which has been negotiating and which talked to Pompeo, which talked to President Trump. And you mentioned some of the people who are designated as terrorists, but don't forget the terrorists were established or accepted by the United States as interlocutors. Mr. Sirajuddin Haqqani was sitting across the table with Pompeo, with Zal Khalilzad. President Trump called Mullah brother, congratulated him. And Sirajuddin Haqqani, if I'm not mistaken, had an op-ed in the New York Times on 20th of February 2020. So the respectability was given to him also. And CIA chief, Mr. Burns, and the CIA deputy chief, Mr. David Cohen, has been talking to these folks, terrorism designation notwithstanding. So I think there's pragmatism on both sides when it comes to that issue. So I think the focus should be more on humanitarian concerns and ensuring that the 38 million people of Afghanistan, their lives and livelihoods are protected.
I think the focus on prioritizing the humanitarian cooperation especially as winter approaches, is one that I'm sure will resonate well with your interlocutors here in Washington. I would say that I think the view here is that the Taliban has not been appreciably more pragmatic. And there were some who said, oh, these guys will never change. And there was another crowd here over the last few years who said, no, watch what they've done in the negotiations. They're open to being a different kind of movement than they were when they governed in the 1990s. And so far, it seems from this perspective, and you might have a different view, I'd be interested, that they have prioritized the cohesion of their movement, which means elevating some of the most unsavory figures. And that, I think, has made it very challenging to figure out where to move forward diplomatically. I wanted to ask about China. You've had a long and deep involvement with China. And I want to begin by asking about CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is I don't know if you still use this language. If China still uses this language, CPEC is the flagship of BRI. Well, if it's not the flagship, it's certainly the largest single cluster of projects in a given country. The scale is large and impressive. The first phase of CPEC, we now see on the ground the fruits of that investment in energy generation, roads, and some investment at Gwadar Port in particular. I wanted to see if you could give us some insight into what's next on the horizon, because from everything that I've looked at, phase 2 of CPEC is a little bit harder to define, a little bit harder to figure out. Agriculture and technology and things like this, apart from some of the rail investments. The rest of it, I'm having trouble getting my hands around. And I think there's a concern I've heard from some Pakistanis that the first phase was big, visible, and in many ways will be impactful, though it was expensive. The second phase, some people aren't sure if it's really going to materialize. So if you could walk us through a little bit how you see this project, this investment building, what you think it might look like, and what we should watch for as indications that it can scale in a meaningful way, as the first phase did.
Thank you very much. When it started, when CPEC was launched as part of the Belt and Road Initiative of China, and as you know, this was announced first in September 2013 in Astana by President Xi Jinping. And then this was the Silk Road Economic Belt, which was the land route. And then in November 2013 in Jakarta, Indonesia, they announced the Maritime Silk Road. And now it is called the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative. And they had 2 Belt and Road forums also, one in 2017 and one in 2019, and I attended both of them. And now it includes roughly around 117 countries spread over Asia, Middle East, Europe, Africa, Latin America, and a number of other companies and are involved. I'll just give you one interesting statistic which shows what has been happening in the last several years. After 9/11, according to the Brown University Costs of War study, the US spent or squandered $6.4 trillion in the war on terror. In the same period, China invested $4 trillion in the last 20 years in 3,000 projects. And $1.9 trillion was spent on the Belt and Road Initiative in 1,600 projects. So the focus should be clear. When CPEC started, China's investment in Pakistan, they offered, I think that was a gesture of friendship in our view, because at that time, Pakistan was facing internal strife through terrorism. The economy was uneven. The area was volatile. And no country whether our Muslim brothers or our Western long-standing allies and friends were willing to invest in Pakistan. So China coming forth with the launch of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor was a vote of confidence by our long-standing friend in the future of Pakistan. And that has paid off. We had serious issues of electricity shortages, which have been alleviated because this has added 6,000 megawatts to our national grid. We had issues of connectivity within the country because we are a federation of 4 provinces and 2 major regions. And infrastructure and energy were the focus, plus Gawada port. I remember when I was growing up, we used to have talk of 2 things. That one day there was 2 dreams, one having a port on Gwadar. It's been talked about for the last 30 years. The first time it was mentioned officially was in 1992, when after the breakup of the Soviet Union, the ECO was launched, Economic Cooperation Organization. And there was a conference which is called in Quetta in Balochistan. It's called the Quetta Declaration. They talked of a port in Gwadar. But it took time to materialize. And this other one was coal. We are the 5th largest reservoirs of coal in the world. And we have coal in a place called Thar, which is close to the Indian border. But there was no mining. There's no generation of electricity. Today, coal is being mined, generated into electricity. And what is more important, that area is one where there's a very strong non-Muslim Pakistanis presence, mostly from the Hindu community. And today, if you go there, women are driving dumper trucks and tractors because in CPEC projects, generating electricity, mining coal, generating electricity which goes to the national grid. 75,000 Pakistanis have gotten jobs in that. And it also affected, by the way, by 2017-18, the growth rate in Pakistan was 5.8. Generated by this growth. The distance from Quetta to Gwadar is now 8 hours. So it has delivered, the first phase was energy, infrastructure, and Gwadar port. And Gwadar port today is the closest transshipment point for the Central Asian republics and Afghanistan. If you bring goods from Karachi to the Afghan border, it's 1,800 kilometers. If you bring goods from Gwadar to Kandahar, it's 900 kilometers. So Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan find that as the shortest outlet to the sea. Now we come to the question, second phase. The second phase is more about socioeconomic development. And at the core of it are 2-3 elements. One is poverty alleviation projects in less developed areas of Pakistan. China has given us a grant, and they normally don't give grants, normally it's business, of $1 billion for poverty alleviation. And we have focused on 27 projects of poverty alleviation in the less developed areas of Pakistan, particularly Balochistan, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and Gilgit-Baltistan. So that is a focus for poverty alleviation, which includes water and irrigation projects also, and some education projects also. The second one, the important phase, is going to be industrial parks and special industrial economic zones. They are under the Board of Investment. In the next 10 years, about 80 million new jobs are going to be generated by China relocating its small and medium industry. By small and medium industry, we mean 100, 200 or 300 million. They will go to Vietnam, Cambodia, Malaysia, Singapore, and hopefully Pakistan also. That's why those industrial zones are going to be important for that. And that is the key element in that. So poverty alleviation is one, mostly socioeconomic development. Industrial zones. And China has offered 20,000 scholarships to Pakistani students for the next 3 years. So already as of now, there are 28,000 Pakistani students studying in China. So this is over a 3-year period the scholarships have been offered. Education is a key element in that. And then there is also going to be what is called ML1. Mainline 1 is the railway project. 1,872 kilometers from Karachi, and it was till Peshawar. I said as chairman of the committee, the parliamentary committee, it should be till Torkham. Torkham is the border point with Afghanistan. And the reason we say Torkham is because we want to have it go to Jalalabad. Jalalabad, then it will go up north, Tarmez, to Mazar-e-Sharif. And Mazar-e-Sharif is close to the most important Uzbek town with Afghanistan. Across the Amu Darya, it's called Tarmez. I've been to Tarmez from the Uzbek side. So this is what we talk of rail connectivity. So what we are looking at is a whole new world opening up. I call it Greater South Asia as a geo-economic concept, not a geographical concept. South Asian countries. South Asia is not just India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Maldives. It's also Myanmar, Pakistan, Iran, Afghanistan, Central Asian republics, and China. So at the hub of regional connectivity, and you're talking of ports, pipelines, roads, railways, economy, energy, a whole new world opening up. In this regard, we welcome President Biden's B3W, Build Back Better World. And the European Union has launched also another copycat project of BRI. It's called Global Gateway. So there are 2 copycat projects. One is American, one is European. We welcome that. And then there's another one. Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline. That's also on the track. TAPI. And in fact, I would say there's also another one, IPI, Iran, Pakistan, India pipeline. So what we are saying is, somebody asked me what's going to happen. I said there'll be a new thing called Pipelinistan in the region. So these pipelines linking up India, Pakistan, China, Central Asia, this is the future. And I remember Prime Minister Manmohan Singh of India, who's a good friend, he said his vision was, and that is what we would like eventually. I mean, as a culmination point. Professor Calder has a book which I'm dying to read because I have a long flight back to Pakistan on Eurasian heartland. So this is, Manmohan Singh used to say, his vision is of the regional connectivity, and it's doable. He'd like to have breakfast in Amritsar, lunch in Lahore, and dinner in Kabul, all in one day, you're driving across. I think that vision will be realized in our lifetimes. Inshallah, God willing.
Thank you. That's I've crossed over many of these borders, by foot and car, and it's quite laborious. So I think those who are tourists would love that, and traders as well.
I've traveled by taxi most of Central Asia, by road and buses.
Yes, I've fond memories of breaking down in the middle of the Central Asian steppes in the winter on a bus. I wanted to press you on a couple points of skepticism here. One is on Gwadar. There's been a lot of investment. Somehow I got on a WhatsApp list for those who were selling property plots in Gwadar. So I'm awakened in the middle of the night by my phone going off, offering me these beautiful. I don't know if these facilities actually exist, if they're being built, but there's been very little ship traffic, right? That has materialized thus far, and some skepticism as to what can Gwadar do for companies and countries that want to trade that can already be done in Karachi. So if you could unpack that a little bit. And the second is on the other side with India, all of the studies have shown that trade between Pakistan and India would be great for Pakistan and great for India, but the political obstacles have been persistent. What do you think, if anything, can be done to advance some of the trade or connectivity opportunities in the absence of real political change or real political progress in that relationship? Does it all hang on the state of the India-Pakistan political relationship, or is there anything else that can be done in that space to unlock some of those opportunities?
I was touring China in 1980 or so, or 81. And Deng Xiaoping had just announced his reform and opening up policy. And I came from Hong Kong to Guangdong province, where the canton is vacant. And I was told that there's a small fishing village called Shenzhen, which they have selected for. And I went to Shenzhen. It's like a big swarm. What is happening in Gwadar? And today, it's a city of 3 million and the center of Huawei and whatever you call it, all the big. It's the Silicon Valley of China. Gwadar port, we asked China to our request. It was General Musharraf, he was the president. He met Yu Rongju, the prime minister, and the prime minister, and we just said we want to do it on the fast track. And Yu Rongju promised us that within 8 weeks, he'll get the NDRC, the National Development Reform Commission of China. And he got, normal, there's a long line of permissions and plans. He did it on the fast. They started construction in 2003. They completed it in 2007, and then they handed it over to us. He said, you asked us to build the port. We've done it. Please take. Of course, we didn't know how to run it. So, although we were running Karachi port for a long time, we gave it to the Ports of Singapore Authority. The Ports of Singapore Authority failed to deliver something. Of course, there are conspiracy theories also, but because we are the best conspiracy theorists east of Suez, mostly the region. And now I find our American friends also being conspiracy theorists after being involved in the war on terror. So they are talking. So somehow it never took off. Then it was President Zardari, the People's Party, Government Party. He said to China, we would like you to run. And an agreement was signed on March 12, 2000 for the Kuwait. Now, unlike the port in Hambantota in Sri Lanka, which is in the constituency of President, the Rajapaksa brothers, as you know, this was, as I said, because we have the one major port is Karachi, then there's one called Port Qasim, close to Karachi, which is mostly Calder. And this was a natural port because we have a 1,000-kilometer coastline, and this was a natural deep sea, and it's a beautiful port. You even go to Chabahar, you see it's a deep sea port. It's a natural. So this is how it has been developed. Now we already have a special economic zone, which is there, 2,400 acres of land, and traffic is now fixed. Yes, because the focus was the enabling facilities were not there. One of the first things I did was, when I took over as CPEC, education and fisheries. So we have a Gwadar Institute of Technology, Vocational Training Institute, more education institutes, and now we have a warehouse because the fishing was done. The fish was put in ice boxes and taken to Karachi, 6-7 hours a day. Fish processing should be done inside Goa. We have done it, and now it's dual purpose. It can also do the processing of dates. Because a lot of dates come from Turbat and other areas, and very high quality dates. So we have started doing that. And very high quality tuna, tiger prawns, if you like seafood, and a lot of good stuff you get. So I think it's not just a port, it is. Now, of course, real estate developers come. I was chairman of the Parliamentary Committee. So why don't you take a plot, buy it? It was dirt cheap. I said, no, I'm not here for.
We're on the same list.
Yes, so forget that. It's about development, connectivity. So I think it's moving forward, and it will be. I have no doubt that this will become the new hub as of connectivity. It's close to the Straits of Hormuz also, and it's also something which is a requirement for the area for outlet for Central Asian and also for Balochistan. So I think that the skepticism is unfounded. And even the criticism of this project, Sri Lanka, I was reading an article in the Atlantic published from there. And this article, I think all their students and researchers here, please see Atlantic, 6th of February 2021. It's an article written by two American professors, one from Yale, one from Harvard. It's called The Myth of the Chinese Jet. The Myth of the Chinese Jet. Please read. It's an American source. And by the way, one of the best articles in the American media to be published on Gawada was in the Atlantic also, by Robert Kaplan, the issue of May 2009. This is a cover story. He went there before CPEC, but after the completion of the form. What is the future? And you can see that. It's quite an uplifting message. So I think that in that context, we see it's all about geoeconomics, it's all about regional connectivity, and it's all about putting it together. And also that hopefully with peace returning, or semblance of peace in Afghanistan, and our relations with Iran, which are very good, because the Iran and Afghanistan border Balochistan province, and this port will have tremendous.
And on the India side of the border.
On India side of the border, I would say that as a person who started the first Pakistan-India track to, when I was editor of the Muslim in 1984. And I was the first Pakistani journalist to write syndicated columns for the Indian newspapers, Times of India, Hindustan Times, and there was a newspaper by M.J. Akbar called The Telegraph from Calcutta, and I was writing a syndicated column. And for the first time, Indian journalists were writing for the Muslim, which I was the editor. First time. Kuldeep Nair, Bhavani Singh Gupta, Pran Chopra, big names of that period. So I think that this is extremely important. I was reading the book of Shyam Saran, who's the Indian former Foreign Secretary. And Shyam Saran is a very big name. I think he's also ambassador once in Washington or some other place. And his view is how India views the world. Shyam Saran's book. It mentions how Pakistan and India came close to an agreement on Sialkot and surf trade, and how it was sabotaged by the Indian security establishment. General V.P. Singh was the Chief of Army Staff, and Mr. Narayanan was the National Security. So I think that this is an accident-prone relationship, but I always say the 3 C's: cricket, commerce, and culture can be the building stones because of a people to people and a bilateral. And Chinese have also been advising us. They say that a 2-track policy. Chairman Mao used to say, talk, talk, fight, fight. So you maintain your principled position on Kashmir, you continue the dialogue on Kashmir, and you continue cooperation on the 3 C's. Cricket, which is the second religion after the main religion, and commerce and culture. No big wedding in India, in the Indian state of Punjab, is complete without singers and performers from Pakistan, by the way. There's this cultural compatibility also. And I think that I remember at 2005 or 2006, our formal trade with Afghanistan was $2.5 billion, and our informal trade with Afghanistan was $5 billion. So with India, it's sky's the limit. And I would say we invite India to CPEC. We invite India to join the IPI, resume that. IPI was Iran, Pakistan, India pipeline. The Americans put pressure on India also and Pakistan also. India reneged on that pipeline under pressure from the Americans because they offered them, like the Gulf. What was that Marlon Brando's line in Godfather? I'll make you an offer you cannot refuse. It was about this India-US nuclear deal. And they cut that link. I think time has come with Iran talks resuming with the US. I think the future is connectivity, and everything is on the table. But you can't have Pakistan bashing or trying to put pressure, and then you say, let's do that. I think let's start with cricket. low-hanging fruit. We are ready for it. Sky's the limit. And I feel that we can choose our friends, but we can't choose our neighbors. So I'm basically an Asianist in South Asia, and I feel strongly, not just about India. I used to write for the press in Nepal, in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka. These are all important strategic partners because they are in the neighborhood. And I think if there's more connectivity in the neighborhood, based on a compatibility of interest, based on reciprocity and equality, why not? The more, the merrier. You ready?
Great. Thank you so much. Let's we have a few minutes for some questions. If we have some from the audience or some from those who are watching online, maybe in the interest of time, I'll collect 2 or 3 questions and then you can field them sequentially. Are there any questions? Dr. Calder, please.
If you can project.
I can just go ahead
Okay.
without a mic. But maybe for a right, I didn't have
Thank you, sir.
one thing that I haven't found out rest of the one thing I haven't heard about so far is one of the countries that I was topic you would consider worth naming. So what I was wondering about was what sort of role historically how do you see role forward?
That's a very important question because I think that when we talk of the Asian century in the 21st century, I think that among the key countries which will be dominant or not dominant but play a pivotal role, Japan, China, Korea, Pakistan, India would be in the forefront. And Japan historically has had a very close relationship. Pakistan's industrial development, when it began in the 50s, 60s, was inextricably linked with Japan. I remember top industrialists, they still tell me with a lot of pride that we went to Japan to buy the machinery for our factories, textiles. So it was from Japan. And in the 80s and the 90s, Japan was giving Pakistan, it was the largest donor to Pakistan, up to $800 million. And I remember President Ziaul Haq, he went to Japan on a very famous visit. It was 1983. And when he came back, he invited 5 top Japanese scholars and intellectuals to Pakistan. And there was a thematic of 3 or 4 conferences in every province of Pakistan. And I was one of the interlocutors from the Pakistan side as a young editor of the Muslim. How Pakistan can learn from Japan. This was the theme, 1983. So there were a series of, I think, 4 seminars in all, Islamabad and Karachi and I think Lahore and one other place. So how Pakistan can learn from Japan. And so there was this very strong intellectual interaction and with Japan and so forth. And then, of course, with the Japanese leadership, whether it was Mr. Sato or whether it's Mr. Tanaka, we have had, I think that things started changing in the 21st century when I think more polarization took place. But Japan figures very largely in the Pakistani imagination. And I remember when we were going nuclear in 1998, I was the Minister for Information. And as the chief spokesman of Pakistan at that time, there was a high-level Japanese delegation. There were two delegations which came. One was Strobe Talbot from the US as Deputy Secretary of State, and one was from Japan. I think their foreign minister came. And they said, we're just there on a moral issue, that please don't go nuclear. So they were very much interested. So of course, we didn't start the nuclear, we just responded to India's nuclear tests. But so Japan, we have had this close relationship. And one of my good friends in Islamabad has been the Japanese ambassador also, and we are trying to revive that relationship because Japan has a key role. And we'd like to de-link that role from a Cold War premise or a geopolitical perspective that is not linked just, it's focusing on Quad or it's linked with a new Cold War. Japan by itself is part of Asia. Japan was the first Asian country which defeated a European power in the 20th century when in the Russo-Japanese War. So Japan has a certain imprint on the Asian consciousness as a great country, as a modern country, as a country which also rose from the debris of the Second World War, like Germany, of course, but which has that resilience. So Japan represents the Asian spirit of resilience and revival, which you feel in other Asian countries. So I also feel that Japan should also play a more proactive role. They have been involved in Afghanistan and in a positive manner. And I hope that Japanese influence can be a standalone factor, not just as an extension of American foreign policy, but Japan as an Asian country which has a very good track record with other countries of Asia, but also in its own right as a country which has been a beacon of progress. So we hope that Japan can play the role, but Japan figures a lot in the consciousness. Slowly, they've been a bit low-key, but I think after Abe, after Mr. Kishima's now elections of the LDP, they would be, I think, back in business in Asia, hopefully. Not just as an adjunct of American foreign policy or a Quad alone, but as a larger standalone policy with other Asian countries, which are very important. Thank you, sir. Thank you. And I learned a lot in my conversation with Dean Calder and Professor White, because these are basically Asianists. And I'm also an old Asianist, because we see how the Asian century is developing and how Asian countries are moving forward. And so it was a great, and I look forward to reading your book. Certainly. Thank you. Now it will be a pleasure.
Hi, Senator. Pakistani, current student here. So the recent news. Yeah.
Can I know your name, please?
Oh, Ali. Hi. So there was a massive shift from geopolitics to geoeconomics. I think the Army Chief himself said that this was his intention. But our sort of main policy disadvantages are lack of exports. And CPEC is sort of doing the opposite by bringing in imports, further exacerbating our balance of payments crisis. So how do you see this situation sort of developing?
Thank you. This shift from geopolitics to geoeconomics has been a process. Not just, I was also there at the Islamabad Security Dialogue, which you just mentioned, in March 2021, where there were speeches by, I spoke at the concluding session, the Army Chief was in the first session. And this shift, actually it started with the launch of the CPEC, as well as initiatives like TAPI, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, because it was the first linkage of Central Asia, Afghanistan with Pakistan and India. So the vision has already been there. Its implementation then was, because of Afghanistan situation, TAPI couldn't take off the pipeline. So, and also there's one other called CASA, Central Asia and South Asia, which is Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan for electricity. So CPEC already has put that Pakistan is now embarked on the process of regional connectivity. Of course, there's a lot of talk of this balance of payments issue. It's not linked with China. When we talk of the debt issues also,
93.5% of our debt is to multilateral organizations, Western countries or Arab countries. China figures very low in that. It's 6.5% of the total percentage of debts. And on certain issues, there have been discussions on the power projects. One should be very clear on one thing, that the Chinese power companies who came as part of CPEC were not given any special concessions. They were part of the government of Pakistan's energy policy, which was enunciated in 1994 during the People's Party period of the IPPs, Independent Power Producers. So that applies to any company, whether it's Chinese, whether it's American, British, or Japanese. So that's across the board. And there have been issues of some payments, but those are talks in progress, like we have talks with the IMF, like we have talks with other countries. So it's not in a crisis situation. And one other thing I would like to say is that with China, when we've had these economic issues, because of a broader relationship, especially the political relationship and the strategic relationship, we have always had concessional agreements, even on loans also, which are softer loans spread over 20 to 30 years at interest payments of 2% or 1.5%. So I do not see it linked with Pakistan's quest of geoeconomics that there are any impediments on that count. The impediments are others. For example, you talk of power projects, the biggest problem is theft, line losses, and antiquated equipment. We lose 1.5 billion rupees a day because of that. And that is one area we have not been able to get a handle on that. So those line losses or those wastage and the circular debt is linked to a man-made problem, which is linked to corruption, which is linked to incompetence, which is linked to antiquated machinery. So I think that requires a certain degree of a vision and a will to overcome that. So if we are able to get a handle on that, I think the other problems will fall in line. Thank you very much.
Ambassador, you want to ask a question? Or I just want to thank you. Okay, very good. We are indeed out of time. Thank you so much for an engaging conversation.
Thank you so much.
And it is it's inspiring to be able to have a conversation with someone who has we've met a number of times before in Pakistan, but someone who has continues to play such an important role in Pakistan's relationship with the rest of Asia and with the United States. So,
I was thank you so much for providing this meeting, Dean Calder. I basically came to Washington, apart from a homecoming, to listen and learn. And I think I've learned a lot in these days and also from this interaction. And basically my calling has been, you mentioned also, I started off as a teacher. And if I hadn't been fired in those days, I would have still been a teacher. But since I was jobless, so I became a journalist. And when I lost my job as a journalist, I became a politician. So it always, the world is, the sky is the limit. So, and it's a great learning experience for me. And I wish all of you good luck in your endeavors. SAIS is one of the leading schools of international relations. And Washington is a happening place, never a dull moment. And I thank the ambassador also and the embassy for the hospitality. We just came from a sumptuous Pakistani breakfast. And so, you know, that was such a stimulator for a Lahori like me from Lahore, where food is a very key element. And by the way, I'm a lover of Japanese cuisine also. Yes, absolutely, which is one of the best in the world, actually, and so healthy too. But so we look forward to seeing some of you or all of you in Pakistan. Pakistan is a wonderful place. The people are warm and welcoming. It's one of the beautiful places. The Japanese tourists come there every March to Hunza for the cherry blossoms when they're blossoming in spring. So, and I, as Minister for Tourism, had organized what I call spiritual tourism. Buddhist monks coming from Korea, Japan, and Thailand to the oldest Buddhist university in Texela. So you're welcome. And Dean Calder, Professor White, a special invitation for you. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.